don't usually talk about what happened out there. Most days I convince myself it was a dream, a fever, or a trick of grief. But when the nights grow too quiet, when the fog rolls down from the hills, and the air smells faintly of soap and whetstone, I remember. There's something about the countryside that feels older than the people who live there. Older than the houses, the churches, the roads. Something that watches from beneath the water patient and unseen. This isn't a story about ghosts. Not really. It's about promises. About the things we take for granted and the things the river takes back. If you ever find yourself in a quiet village tucked away in the folds of the valley and someone tells you not to go near the water, listen to them, because I didn't. And this is what the river left me with. Chapter 1. The Confession. I've never been the sort of person to post stories online. I don't even like talking much. But there are nights when I can't sleep, and I keep seeing it, her standing by the water. And I think if I write it down, if I say it out loud to someone, maybe I can finally stop dreaming of the river. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that, a few months ago, I made the worst decision of my life. We moved into a small place, a hilltop cottage that looked nicer online than it did in person. Still, Mara loved it. She said it had charm, that it was exactly the kind of house we needed to start over. Sunlight spilled through the crooked windows, catching on the brass handles and old wooden beams, and she stood there with her arms spread wide, smiling, like she'd found a hidden treasure. "It's perfect," she said. "Look at that view. It's like something out of a painting. I can take pictures for the shop, maybe even start selling my soaps online again." She was always the dreamer between us. I was the one who kept track of bills and deadlines until I stopped keeping track altogether. The truth is, we didn't move here for a change of scenery. We moved here because I was drowning in debt, in bad decisions, in promises I couldn't keep. I'd borrowed money from people you don't borrow from twice. I'd gambled on the idea that one big win would make it all right again. It didn't. When everything came crashing down, the cottage felt like a way to hide. A cheap place, remote enough that no one would bother to come looking. Mara thought I was doing it for us, for our digital detox, as she called it. I didn't correct her. It was easier to let her believe we were chasing peace rather than running from consequence. The air up there was clean. You could taste it cold, crisp, laced with the smell of damp grass and wood smoke. From the porch you could see the town below, like a smudge of rooftops in the valley, circled by slow, sleepy trees. I remember thinking it was beautiful. Too quiet, perhaps, but beautiful in the kind of way that hides things. We unpacked, cleaned, and made the place our own. It creaked and groaned at night like an old man settling into his bones. But Mara said it was character. She had a way of making flaws sound romantic. I wanted to believe it. I really did. That first night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. The room was dim silver light, leaking through the curtains, and I thought I heard something. It wasn't footsteps exactly. More like the sound of fabric twisting in water. Slow, wet, rhythmic. At first, I thought it was the pipes. Old houses do that sometimes. But when I got up, I noticed something strange, the smell. It wasn't damp wood or mold. It was something sharp like iron and soap. I checked the sink. Nothing. The bathroom tap wasn't dripping either. But when I stepped closer to the window, I saw movement, just a flicker down near the tree line, where the moonlight met the fog. Something pale. Then gone. I told myself, It was the light, maybe a fox or an owl, anything that made sense. Because the truth was, I didn't want to think too much about it. When I climbed back into bed, Mara stirred beside me. She mumbled something about the river. What river, I asked. She didn't answer, just turned onto her side and drifted back into sleep. That was the first night in the cottage, and looking back now, I should have known. Chapter 2. The Warning in the Village. The next morning, everything felt brighter. The fog had lifted, the air smelled faintly of rain and rosemary, and Mara was already buzzing with plans, photographs, markets, soap stands. She wanted to make friends, to connect with the locals, as she called it. So we walked down into the village. It wasn't much a row of shops, with faded signs, a pub that looked older than the road it stood on, and a general store tucked beside a post office. It smelled of wood polish and vinegar inside. Mara was in her element, chatting easily with the man behind the counter, asking about hiking trails and the local market. I stayed back, looking around at the shelves of tinned food, old postcards and fishing hooks that looked like they hadn't moved in years. The shopkeeper was a man in his late 50s, maybe older. Weathered face hands, like bark, and a voice that came out slow and heavy. He looked at Mara for a moment, then at me, and finally tilted his chin towards the hills behind us. "You're up by the old riverbend, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded. "Aye, the hilltop cottage." He seemed to consider that for a moment. Then he said, very matter-of-factly, "Best keep clear of the water come nightfall. The Riverwives don't take kindly to being stared at." Mara blinked a polite smile, freezing on her lips. The Riverwives. He gave a slow nod. "Aye, the women by the river. You'll know them if you see them. Don't let it get that far." It sounded rehearsed, like something he'd said 100 times before, but never to someone who actually listened. Before either of us could respond, another voice came from one of the aisles, a man's voice, low and rough. "He's right," he said. "If you see them, don't greet them, and don't let them greet you. Best act like you don't see him at all." Mara's polite smile faltered. She turned to me, eyebrows raised, as if waiting for me to tell her it was all some local joke. But then an older woman behind the counter, late 60s, maybe looked up from a basket of apples and said, "Girls like you, love you ought to cover up near the water. The river don't forgive soft hearts or soft skin." Her eyes flicked to Mara's dress, light sleeveless, perfectly normal for the weather, and she frowned. "You don't go offering bits of yourself without thinking. The river takes what it's given." Mara's jaw tightened. She forced a smile, murmured, "Of course," and turned to me. I could see the muscle in her cheek twitching. That was Mara's tell, when she was fighting not to argue. "Let's go," I said quietly. "Still need to get to the hardware shop before it shuts." We thanked them and stepped outside. The door shut behind us with a hollow clink of the bell, and for a few seconds, neither of us said a word. Then Mara let out a sharp breath. "Bloody hell," she muttered. "Cover up, because my arms are showing. What century are we in?" "It's just old village talk," I said. "You know how these places are. Folk traditions, local stories. Stories that tell women to shut up and stay home," she snapped. "Brilliant." I let her vent because she wasn't wrong. Still, something about the way they'd said it stuck with me. There wasn't malice in their voices, just warning. When I looked back at the shop, the older woman was still watching us through the window. Her expression wasn't smug or curious. It was pity. Mara noticed me looking and rolled her eyes. Don't tell me you believe all that nonsense. I shrugged. I don't know what I believe. Just, let's stay clear of the river for a while. Yeah, she laughed softly, that tired kind of laugh you use when humor feels like armor. You're as bad as them, she said, shaking her head. I'm fine, we're fine. But later as we walked home, I kept thinking about the way the woman had said it. The river takes what it's given. I didn't know then how literal that would become. Chapter 3. The Quiet Life. If you'd met us a few weeks after that visit to the village, you'd have thought we'd settled in well. Mara took to the countryside like she'd been born for it. She woke with the light and disappeared into the fields with a basket looped over her arm, collecting herbs and wildflowers whose names I could never remember. She'd come back smelling of lavender and mugwort with a smear of mud on her cheek and a smile that could melt stone. She started hanging bundles of herbs above the kitchen window to dry. When I worked on my laptop at the table, she'd hum under her breath, little wordless tunes that wrapped around the smell of wood smoke and rosemary. Sometimes she left small notes for me, tiny sketches of flowers or hearts, a joke about the way I made tea too strong. It was domestic, peaceful, the sort of life people move to the country for. And yet, there was always that edge to it. The silence here was too thick. I'd sit out on the porch at night, trying to enjoy the stillness, and realize that the crickets never sang. Even the river far below seemed to hold its breath. The night stretched too long, and sometimes I thought I heard things, wet footsteps in the grass, the sound of fabric twisting in water again. I'd tell myself it was the wind moving through the reeds, or deer crossing the shallows, but it never quite sounded like either. Mara laughed at me the first time I mentioned it. You're just not used to the quiet, she said. City people always think silence is haunted. Maybe she was right. I was used to the noise of traffic, of people, of excuses I couldn't stop making. Here there was only space, and space leaves room for thought. Too much of it, maybe. Because the truth was, the cottage wasn't just our fresh start. It was my escape hatch. The debts hadn't vanished. They were waiting just like the emails I'd stopped answering. I'd gambled everything, our savings, our home, on one last chance to fix what I'd ruined. And I'd lost. Every time Mara smiled at me, every time she talked about building a new life here, I felt a weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. She thought I'd saved us, but I'd only bought us time. So I started running in the mornings. I told her it was to stay fit, but really it was to think. I'd be out the door before dawn, lacing my shoes while the sky was still dark. The air bit cold and clean, and for a while it felt like the kind of punishment I deserved. I'd run until my lungs burned, following the hedgerows and stone walls, listening to my breath and the rhythm of my shoes against the dirt. One morning, I turned down a new path I hadn't noticed before. It dipped through a stand of large trees where the air felt colder and the mist gathered thick around my ankles. Somewhere ahead, I could hear the river. I remember thinking it was strange how quiet the birds had become. Even the wind seemed to hold itself back. Then I saw them. At first, I thought they were people washing clothes. Old women, maybe early risers, bent over wooden washboards in the shallows. But as I got closer, I saw that the water came up past their knees, that their tresses clung to them, like skin, heavy and dark. They moved in unison, slow and steady, scrubbing at fabric that never seemed to come clean. One of them lifted a strip of cloth red water, running off it in thin ribbons. Another turned slightly, and though the fog hid her face, I felt her looking straight at me. Not a glance, something sharper. The air seemed to tighten. I took a step back, a twig snapping under my shoe. All of them stopped at once. The sound died. The fog thickened. Then as one, they bent their heads again and went back to their washing. I don't remember deciding to run, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was back on the path, breath-ragged mud up my legs. By the time I reached the cottage, the sun was up and the world was normal again. Birds sang. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Mara turned from the stove when I came in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, smiling. "Or fallen in the river." Something like that, I muttered. My hands were shaking. She frowned when she saw the blood on my knee. "You've cut yourself. Sit down, I'll get something." She crossed the room, pulling a jar of ointment from the shelf. When she knelt beside me, I caught the faint scent of soap on her skin, sharp, clean, and oddly metallic. "What were you doing down there anyway?" she asked. "Running," I said. "Took a wrong turn." She dabbed at the scrape. By the river, I hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "You didn't see anyone down there, did you?" For a second, I thought she was teasing. Then I saw that she was serious. Why, I asked. "Because I did," she said softly. "Yesterday, just for a moment. I thought it was someone from the village doing laundry, but they looked strange." The words lodged in my throat. "What do you mean strange?" "They didn't look up," she said. "Didn't stop, didn't speak. Just stood in the water, washing something over and over. I called out, but they didn't react. It was like I wasn't there." She smiled awkwardly, brushing it off. "Probably just old women keeping to themselves. You know what these places are like." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we were both just seeing things. But when I looked down at my leg, at the mud, and the faint red stain that wouldn't wash away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the river had noticed us. Chapter 4. The River's Edge. The days after that slipped into a rhythm. Mara spent her mornings outside, filling the cottage with the smell of herbs and sun, while I tried to convince myself that what I'd seen by the river was just some trick of the mist. You can make yourself believe anything if you say it often enough. Mara was happy here. That mattered more than my unease. She'd started walking the lanes on her own basket over her arm, coming back with yarrow and horsetail wild roses, and roots she said were good for skin. "I could start the shop again," she said one evening, laying out her finds on the kitchen table. "A proper online shop this time. Country-made small batch. You'll see people love this sort of thing." Her enthusiasm made the cottage feel warm, and for a while I let myself believe that warmth could burn away the rest, the debts, the warnings, the image of those women in the water. Then one afternoon, I caught her cleaning a bundle of herbs by the sink humming. The song stopped when she noticed me. "You were by the river again," I said. It wasn't a question. She dried her hands. "It's the only place the yarrow grows thick enough. Don't start." Mara, the shopkeeper, told us. "Oh, please," she cut in. "You're not really buying into that superstition, are you, Riverwives?" She said the word like it tasted bitter. They can talk all they like about curses and ghosts. I'm not going to live my life scared of old stories. I wanted to argue, but she looked tired of being told what to fear. "All right," I said. "Just don't go alone. Not until we know the paths better." She didn't promise. She just smiled and said, "You worry too much." That night, the sound came back, the twisting, wet rhythm. I lay still, counting the beats between each one. When I couldn't stand it any longer, I went to the window. The fog had come down thick again. I couldn't see the trees, only the faint silver of the river below. But something was moving in it, not in the water in the fog itself. Slow shapes that swayed as though the air was water. Then I heard Mara. She murmured in her sleep, a wordless sound, and rolled over. I stepped away from the window and watched her face in the half-light. Peaceful, untroubled. I told myself I was the one seeing ghosts because I deserved to. By morning the fog had gone, and so had she. Her boots were missing from the door. I found her an hour later down by the bank sleeves, rolled up, hands in the mud. She was washing something in the shallows, a strip of linen, maybe one of her cloth wraps. Mara. She jumped, dropping it into the water. God, you scared me. What are you doing? Nothing. She wiped her hands on her skirt, just cleaning a stain. It's fine. But the cloth was gone, carried off by the current before she could grab it. Leave it, I said. It's not worth it. She looked at me, then really looked as if she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. You're right, she said at last. It's gone. We walked back in silence. Halfway up the path, I glanced behind us. The water was still perfectly still, but there was color caught in it, faint red threads spreading out like veins. That evening, she made a new batch of soap. I watched her melt the base grind, herbs pour the mixture into molds. When she was done, she pressed a pale gray bar into my hand. Here, she said, for the blood, it'll take the stain right out. I turned it over. It smelled faintly of iron beneath the lavender. Mara, I said quietly, how did you know it was blood? She looked up puzzled for a moment, then laughed too quickly. I guessed. What else stains that badly? Maybe she was right. Maybe that's all it was. But when I left it on the sink that night, the bar left a faint wet ring behind pink, not clear, and the smell of soap didn't hide the metal underneath. Chapter 5. What the water keeps. The next morning I ran again. I told myself it was to clear my head, but really, I wanted to prove there was nothing down there. I needed to see the river in daylight to make it ordinary again. The air was cold enough to sting when I breathed. Dew clung to the grass, turning every cobweb silver. As I followed the path down from the cottage, the light grew thin, filtered through larch and ash, until the world looked half-formed. When I reached the bend, the fog was waiting. It moved like breath, low and heavy, spilling from the water into the trees. The river itself was barely visible, just a grey sheen beneath the mist. And then I saw them. 4 shapes, half lost to the fog. Women again, standing knee-deep in the current. Their dresses hung heavy, their sleeves rolled to the elbow. One lifted a strip of fabric and twisted it, slowly wringing water from it in long red threads. I froze. My heart was hammering so loud, I thought they'd hear it. They didn't look up. Not at first. Then one of them turned slightly, just enough that I saw the curve of her jaw, the line of her mouth. Her skin was pale and bloated, her lips colorless. When she spoke, the sound barely reached me. Would you be kind, love? She said. These hands aren't what they used to be. Give this one a twist. She held up the fabric, dripping limp. I took a step back. The air felt thick, heavy, with something that wasn't quite fog. The others kept scrubbing, slow, rhythmic, like the river itself was breathing through them. Come on, she said again, softer now. You've got young arms. You'd be helping an old woman, that's all. Her voice cracked on the last word, but it didn't sound weak. It sounded hungry. The red water slid off her hands in ropes too dark to be mud. My throat tightened. I remembered what the shopkeeper had said. Don't greet them. Don't offer anything. And I realized how easy it would be to forget. The way she spoke, it sounded polite. Normal. I wanted to move to run, but something in me hesitated. What if she really was old? What if she was just cold, just struggling with the weight of wet cloth? What if walking away made me the kind of man I'd always feared? I was selfish, cruel, small. Then she moved, not toward me exactly, but closer to the bank, dragging the cloth with her. The sound it made was wrong, too thick, too heavy. Please, she said. It just needs a twist. Her hands trembled as she held it out. That's when I saw her wrists. The skin there was split torn where the fabric had cut into her, and something dark oozed from the wounds. I stumbled back. My heel slipped on the mud, splashing water up my leg. The smell hit me copper and rot, beneath the sweetness of soap. The woman's head tilted just slightly, and I saw the folds of her scarf shift, as if something moved underneath. Then she hissed low and sharp. Not even a moment for an old woman. Must be nice having the choice to walk away. The others stopped their scrubbing. The sound of water fell silent. I felt every muscle in my body seize. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face, mud sucked at my shoes. The air grew warmer as I climbed the hill, but I couldn't shake the cold. When I reached the cottage, I slammed the door behind me and slid to the floor, breathing hard. Mara was at the table cutting herbs. She looked up, startled. What happened? Nothing, I said too quickly. Just slipped. Her eyes moved to my hands. They were shaking. You went back down there, didn't you? I didn't answer. She sighed and stood. You have to stop doing this to yourself. There's nothing down there but water and mud. You're spooking yourself. Then why do I smell it on you? I said before I could stop myself. Her expression froze. Smell what? The river. It's on your clothes. She stared at me for a long moment, then dropped her gaze. It's just where the herbs grow, she said quietly. You know that. She brushed past me, her shoulder cold, where it touched mine, and went out into the garden. I stayed where I was, staring at the grey bar of soap on the counter. A faint ring of pink clung to the porcelain beneath it. That night I dreamt of the river again, of hands wringing cloth of water running red, and through it all, a voice that sounded like Mara's, whispering my name, asking me to help. Chapter 6. The Things She Brought Home. After that morning, something shifted between us. Mara didn't say it, but I could tell she thought I'd lost it. Every time I mentioned the river, her mouth tightened just a little. Every time I tried to talk about leaving, she changed the subject. She spent more time out there now. Sometimes she came home with a basket brimming with wild herbs, other times with just a handful of damp stems. I stopped asking where she'd been. The smell of the river followed her in any way, wet stone and metal, faintly sweet underneath, like flowers left too long in a vase. I tried to keep busy, fixed the shutters, stacked firewood, anything to stop thinking about the women in the water. But the cottage never stayed quiet for long. I'd be halfway through making tea and hear the creak of the back door, the low hum of her voice somewhere outside. It wasn't singing exactly, more like murmuring too low for words. One evening, I found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt with the basket beside her. She was sorting herbs by color, muttering to herself. When she saw me, she smiled too quickly. Just getting things ready for the new batch, she said. You wouldn't believe how much I've sold online already." She'd reopened her shop page. The orders came from names I didn't recognize, places far away. There was something strange about it, how quickly it had taken off, how people had even found her in the first place. I picked up one of the soaps she'd left drying near the stove. It was pale grey, almost silver in the light. "What's in this one?" I asked. She hesitated. "A few things," she said finally. "Yarrow horsetail, a little lavender, and something new." "What new?" "I'm not sure what it's called. It grows near the bend in the river. The locals don't pick it, but it's got this smell." She trailed off, closed her eyes for a second. "It's incredible, isn't it? Like rain." I didn't answer. The scent rising from the soap made my stomach twist. It was familiar too, familiar. The same sharp sweetness I'd smelled when I saw the women washing. That night, she went to bed early. I sat at the table with the soap in front of me, the light from the fire flickering across its surface. When I pressed my thumb against it, something gave slightly soft beneath the hardened layer. There was a mark there, small but visible, like a fingerprint. Not mine. I got up, meaning to throw it out, but stopped at the window. The fog was back rolling over the fields like a tide. The river was hidden beneath it, but I could hear the faint slap of water against stone, steady and patient. For a moment, I thought I saw someone moving along the path, a figure small and quick, carrying something in both hands. The mist closed around it before I could be sure. When I went back to the table, the soap was gone. I checked the counter, the sink even under the table, but it wasn't there. I went to the bedroom. Mara was asleep, her hands folded against her chest. She looked peaceful, innocent. But there was a faint red smear on her wrist, like a thread of dye that hadn't washed away. In the morning, I found the soap sitting by the door, wrapped neatly in cloth, tied with twine. A label hung from it in her handwriting. "Mara's Blend, for cleansing what lingers." I wanted to throw it straight into the fire. Instead, I left it on the shelf. Later, when she came down for breakfast, she didn't mention it. She just smiled and said, "You should come with me tomorrow. It's beautiful by the water this time of day." I opened my mouth to refuse, but she touched my arm lightly. And for the first time, I noticed how cold her fingers were. "I promise," she said. "You'll see there's nothing to be afraid of." And against every better instinct I had left, I nodded. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard the sound again, the twisting, the soft slap of wet cloth somewhere beyond the walls. Only this time, there was another sound beneath it, a woman's voice humming low and slow, carrying through the floorboards like a lullaby. And I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the kitchen. Chapter 7. What the River Wanted. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound to stop. It never did. The low, wet rhythm carried on through the dark, steady and deliberate, like someone wringing cloth just beneath the floorboards. By morning, the house smelled faintly of soap again, that same metallic sweetness that clung to everything she touched. Mara moved through the kitchen, humming the sound soft and tuneless. She was already dressed for the day, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with one of her old scarves. "You're coming, right?" she asked when she caught me watching her. "Coming where? To the river?" "You promised last night." I didn't remember promising, but I didn't argue. Maybe if I went with her, I'd see what was really there, prove to myself that it was nothing more than fog and nerves. We took the narrow path that led down from the cottage. The grass was still wet, slick beneath our boots. The fog hadn't lifted yet. It hung low over the fields, swallowing sound. The closer we got, the colder it felt, until even breathing hurt. When we reached the bend, Mara stopped. She smiled faintly, as though she'd been waiting for something. There, she said, pointing to the water. "Do you see how calm it is?" I followed her gaze. The river lay flat and silver under the mist. It should have looked peaceful. It didn't. "Mara," I said quietly, "we shouldn't be here." She laughed. "You really have let those people get into your head. It's just a river." But her voice wavered when she said it. She crouched at the edge, dipping her fingers into the water. I saw the ripples spread slow and perfect, until they reached the far bank and faded. Something dark moved there, something that wasn't just reflection. Mara don't. She ignored me, scooping water into her hands, watching it slide between her fingers. "It's so cold," she murmured, like it's waiting for what she didn't answer. We stayed there for a few minutes before she stood and wiped her hands on her skirt. "See, nothing happened," she said, though her voice was too bright. "You really should stop worrying." We walked home in silence. I didn't tell her that, when she touched the water, I'd seen something rise just beneath the surface, a pale hand slow and deliberate, sinking back before she could see. That evening, she started another batch of soap. The smell was stronger this time, sharp, almost bloody. "What did you use?" I asked. She didn't look up from her work. Same as before. Only this time, I added something from the river. The sediment's good for the skin. I felt a chill move through me. "Mara." She slammed the mold down on the table. "Stop treating me like I'm fragile," she snapped. "You think I don't notice the way you look at me? Like I'm losing my mind. I'm not the one seeing ghosts in the fog." Her eyes were bright, feverish, then softer. "I like it here. I don't want to leave just because you're scared." "I'm not scared," I said. "Then prove it." That's how I found myself standing by the river again the next morning, mist curling around my ankles, the cold biting through my clothes. I told myself I wouldn't look that I'd just run past and keep my head down. But I stopped anyway. The women were there. 5 of them this time, maybe 6. Their dresses clung to their bodies, heavy with water. They didn't move like normal people. They swayed their motions too smooth, as though the river itself guided them. One of them turned toward me. Her scarf had come loose, revealing a head of hair that floated around her like smoke. Her skin was gray and soft, like it would crumble if you touched it. "Would you help me, love?" she called. "It's heavy today." Her voice was kind, too kind. I took a step back. My heels slipped in the mud. "Don't be shy," she said. "You helped your wife, didn't you? You touched what she brought home." My mouth went dry. "What did you say?" The woman smiled, water running from her teeth. "It was only a bit of what we gave her. She shared it with you." I turned and ran. By the time I reached the cottage, my lungs felt like they'd been filled with ice. The door banged behind me. The air inside was thick with steam and the smell of boiling herbs. Mara stood over the stove, stirring something slowly. "You were down there again," she said, without turning. "How do you know?" "Because you smell like them." She turned then, eyes dark, the skin beneath them bruised with sleeplessness. "You should have stayed away," she whispered. "You shouldn't have listened." "What did you do?" She smiled faintly, and it broke my heart how calm she looked. "They just wanted something small. A bit of what's ours. It's a trade, that's all." "Mara." But she was already walking past me, carrying the pot to the sink. The liquid inside shimmered red in the light. That night, I dreamed of her standing in the water, her hands cupped around something dark, whispering to the river, as though it could whisper back. And when I woke, her side of the bed was cold. Chapter 8. The Bargain. The morning came grey and hollow. The fog hadn't burned off, even after the sun had climbed above the trees. It clung to the windows thick as smoke. The air in the cottage was sharp and cold, despite the fire still flickering in the grate. Mara wasn't in bed. At first, I told myself she'd gone to the garden. She did that sometimes, slipped out before breakfast to cut herbs or check her drying lines. But her boots were missing from the door, and when I opened the back door, the grass was marked with prints leading down the hill. I shouted her name, once then again, my breath fogging in the air. No answer. The fog had swallowed the world whole. Its muffled sound turned distance into nothing. I followed the prints, the mud sucking at my shoes, the mist tightening around me. By the time I reached the bend, the river was awake. It wasn't loud exactly, it was restless. The water moved faster than I'd ever seen it, dark and slick beneath the mist. And there she was, standing at the edge sleeves, rolled the hem of her dress, dark with water. She was holding something in both hands, a bundle wrapped in cloth. Mara. She turned startled and nearly dropped it. "You scared me," she said, breathless. "You shouldn't be here." "What are you doing?" Her face softened, but her eyes were distant. "I'm just giving something back. It's a thank you." "For what?" "For the gift," she said simply. "What gift?" "The one they gave me." She unwrapped the cloth as she spoke. Inside were several bars of her new soap, pale grey flecked with something darker. The smell that hit me was sweet and metallic, almost cloying. Mara listened to me. "They're not what people think," she interrupted. "They're not cruel. They're just old, forgotten. The river used to belong to them, you know. Before the town, before us. They said all they wanted was an offering." My throat tightened. "You can't believe that." "They helped me," she said. "When you were sick last week, when the fever had you shaking, they showed me what to use. I made you that tea. And you got better, didn't you?" I stared at her. "You don't know what you drank." She smiled faintly. "You don't either." Before I could move, she knelt and placed the soaps at the edge of the water. The river lapped at her hands almost eagerly. "Mara, stop," I said, stepping forward. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were bright, too bright. "Don't," she hissed. "You'll ruin it." The fog thickened between us, curling like breath. Somewhere beyond it came a sound, the low slap of fabric against stone. The air filled with that sharp, clean scent, and the hairs on my arms stood up. "They're here," she whispered. "They've come to take it." I couldn't see them, but I knew she was right. There was movement in the mist, slow and deliberate shapes, bending and straightening like reeds in the wind. I grabbed her arm. "We're leaving." She tried to pull away. "Let go. You don't understand. They'll be angry." "Good," I snapped. "Let them be angry. You're not giving them anything else." She twisted free with a strength that shocked me, stumbling toward the bank. "I made a promise," she cried. "If I break it, they'll take something worse." Her foot slipped and she went down hard. I lunged after her, but by the time I reached her, she was already half in the water. The current caught the cloth, dragging it out of her hands. The soaps tumbled into the river and vanished. The fog seemed to breathe around us. For a moment, everything went still. Then the surface broke. Hands, pale, bloated hands, shot out of the water, gripping her wrists, her arms, her dress. She screamed and kicked, but they pulled, with impossible strength, dragging her toward the center of the river. "Mara," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders. The cold burned through me like fire. "Let go," she gasped. "You can't." Her sentence ended in a choke as another hand wrapped around her throat. I braced my feet in the mud, but the river was stronger. Her eyes met mine for one last second, wide, terrified, and then she was gone, pulled under in a burst of red and foam. I stumbled back, falling hard onto the bank. The water stilled as quickly as it had risen. Only her scarf remained floating like a strip of smoke before the current took it too. I don't know how long I stayed there. The fog thinned eventually, the world returning in slow, cruel pieces. The birds, the wind, the sound of the water pretending to be ordinary again. By the time I stood, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely make a fist. When I walked back to the village, the shopkeeper saw me first. He didn't ask what had happened. He just looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You were warned." And I realized they hadn't been warning me about the river at all. They'd been warning me about her. Chapter 9. The Drowning. Quiet. The police came that afternoon, 2 of them. They stood in the kitchen, dripping rain onto the tiles, taking notes on damp paper, while I tried to explain. I told them what I'd seen: the fog, the hands, the way the river had come alive. I told them how she'd screamed, how she'd been there one moment and gone the next. I told them everything. They didn't write most of it down. The older one looked at me like he'd heard it all before. The younger one paced near the hearth, pretending to be interested in the herbs hanging from the rafters. So he said, "Finally, your wife slipped into the river." "She didn't slip," I snapped. "She was pulled." He met my eyes for the first time, and the pity in them made me want to hit him. "The current's strong this time of year," he said. "It happens." They went down to the river anyway, boots sinking into the mud, poking at the reeds with sticks. I followed them, though I wished I hadn't. The fog had lifted, but the water looked worse in daylight, flat and dark, as if it was holding its breath. The older officer crouched near the edge. "We'll get divers up here tomorrow," he said. But even as he said it, he looked unconvinced. They found her scarf tangled in a branch, downstream, nothing else. When they handed it to me, I almost dropped it. The fabric was still wet, still cold. That night, the house was too quiet. I kept expecting to hear her humming from the kitchen, the clatter of jars and spoons, the soft creak of her footsteps on the stairs. Instead, there was only the clock ticking and the sound of my own breathing. I didn't light the fire. The air was thick enough already. When I finally went to bed, I left her side untouched. I lay staring at the ceiling until dawn, half waiting for the door to open, for her to call my name, for anything that would make the silence end. She didn't. The next day, the villagers came. Not to offer condolences. Not really. They brought food. I didn't eat the tea. I didn't drink. They stood in the doorway, talking softly, eyes darting to the river, as though afraid it might overhear. The shopkeeper, Hilda, was the last to leave. She set a paper bag of apples on the table and looked at me with that same pity I'd seen before. "They won't find her," she said. I didn't ask how she knew. She gave them what they wanted. That's done now. You're not theirs to bother, unless you give them reason. "What does that mean?" I asked, but she was already walking to the door. Before she left, she looked back once. "Keep the water out of the house," she said. "Don't let it cross your threshold." When she was gone, I locked the door and sat by the window. The fog had started to creep up from the fields, again thick and white, curling over the path, like smoke from an unseen fire. That night, I dreamt of her. She stood in the river hair, floating around her eyes, wide and black as the water itself. She didn't speak, but I heard her voice all the same. "It's not so bad down here," she said. "It's quiet." I woke with my hands clenched around the bedsheet, the taste of river water in my mouth. In the days that followed, the search ended. They told me I could leave if I wanted to, but I didn't. I couldn't. Every room still smelled like her soap and lavender, the ghost of what she'd loved. I filled the silence with work, cleaning, fixing, pretending. I found the molds she used for her soaps in the cupboard. Half a dozen bars sat on the shelf, neatly wrapped in linen. Mara's blend. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe because throwing them away felt like killing her all over again. When I unwrapped one, the scent hit me. Stronger now, sharper. Beneath the herbs, something else, metallic, sweet alive. I dropped it into the basin, meaning to wash it away. But as the water hit it, the surface bloomed red. For a moment, I thought I heard something beneath the hiss of the tap. Something wet and rhythmic, like fabric being twisted underwater. I turned the tap off. The sound kept going. That night, I dreamed again. Only this time, I wasn't watching her. I was beside her. The river was cold, and the hands that held me were gentle. They brushed the hair from my face, touched the cut on my palm, traced the edge of my jaw. "You should have come sooner," they whispered. "You should have helped." When I woke, my hands were wet. I checked every tap in the house, all dry. Outside, the fog had rolled back in. It pressed against the windows, thick and pale, like something breathing just beyond the glass. I went to the kitchen meaning to make tea, but stopped. The bar of soap I dropped in the basin the night before was gone. Only a wet ring remained. I stood there for a long time, listening to the house breathe, waiting for the sound to come again. And then very softly, from somewhere beneath the floor, I heard her humming. Chapter 10. The Things Left Behind. It's strange the way time moves after death. It doesn't flow, it drips. Days slip past like raindrops down a window pane, each one heavy, slow, and cold. The police stopped coming. The villagers stopped knocking. The only ones who visited now were the fog and the wind pressing against the walls like they were checking if I was still inside. I didn't leave the cottage much. Couldn't really. The outside world felt unreal. Whenever I stepped beyond the gate, I'd look at the trees and swear they leaned closer, the branches reaching just a little further each day. So I stayed in surrounded by her things. Her apron still hung by the door. Her hairbrush still sat on the dresser, a few strands of her hair caught in its bristles. I couldn't throw them away. Sometimes I spoke to her, not like the mad do not really. Just words into the empty air. You'd hate the silence, I'd tell her. You'd fill it with humming and make it feel alive again. At night, I'd wake to the sound of dripping. Always the same spot, the kitchen sink. I'd get up, turn the tap, tight dry the counter, and crawl back into bed. But by morning, there'd be a small puddle there again. It didn't smell like water. I tried to ignore it, tried to live. I reopened her online shop, Mara's Blend, just as she'd written on the labels. The villagers helped at first. Hilda gave me a corner of her shop to sell the soaps. People loved your wife's work, she said. You should keep it going. It's what she'd want. Maybe she was right. Maybe that was a way of keeping her alive. So I did it. I followed her recipes as best I could, mixing herbs, boiling oils, cutting bars. But the smell was never right, too clean, too safe. Hers had a weight to it, a sweetness that clung to the air. Then one night, I ran out of yarrow, the herb she always used for healing blends. The last bundle hung above the window, brown and brittle. I knew where she found it. I stared at it for a long time before I decided. The next morning, I packed a basket and walked down to the river. The fog was lighter now, only clinging to the water's edge like lace. The path was soft with mud, but familiar. It felt almost normal, which was worse somehow. When I reached the bend, the current was calm. The trees mirrored in it perfectly. For a moment, I almost believed the stories were lies after all, that she'd simply slipped and vanished like the police said. I crouched near the bank, scanning for the long feathery leaves she'd described. And there it was, yarrow growing in thick clusters by the edge. Pale green, delicate, perfect. As I cut a few stems, the wind shifted. The smell of soap filled the air, sweet, heavy, unmistakable. I looked up. The surface of the river rippled, though there was no breeze. Then something pale drifted beneath it. I told myself it was just light, just reflection, but it moved against the current, slow and deliberate. It rose closer, breaking the surface just enough to catch the sun. Hair, dark and floating. I froze. The water parted slightly, and I saw her face. It was Mara, or what was left of her. Her skin had gone pale, her lips blue, but her eyes were open. They looked straight at me. "Mara," I whispered. Her mouth opened, water spilling out. Her voice came low, gurgling, but clear enough. "You came back." My legs nearly gave out. They said you would. You can finish what I started." I shook my head. "You're not real." She smiled, and it wasn't kind. "You used my blend, didn't you? You carried me home." I stumbled back. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her eyes followed me. "You never threw them away. The bars on the shelf, the ones with my blood." The river around her darkened a slick red, seeping through the water. "Mara." "Don't call me that," she hissed, and the sound wasn't hers anymore. It came from below, deep and many-throated, rising with the current. "You took what was mine. Now give it back." The ground under my feet shifted. My reflection rippled, stretched, and for a second, I saw her standing behind me on the bank hands, pale and dripping eyes, black as the river. I ran. Branches tore at my arms, mud sucked at my boots. But I didn't stop until the cottage came into view. I slammed the door and fell against it, shaking. The air inside was thick with the smell of soap, stronger than ever. It filled every room, clinging to the curtains, the floor, my clothes. I looked around wildly, and that's when I saw it. The bars I'd made, the ones I'd sold at the shop, were gone. Every single one. In their place on the kitchen table lay a single new bar, pale gray, wrapped in linen, dyed with twine. The handwriting on the label was hers, for him. He knows what he owes. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, the house was damp, the floorboards swollen, the walls wept in thin trails down to the skirting. Outside, the river was louder than I'd ever heard it, and I knew then what it wanted. Chapter 11. The Return. I waited until nightfall. The river was louder after dark, swollen with rain, and something heavier that I didn't dare name. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that bar of soap gray, smooth and faintly glistening in the candlelight. It seemed to sweat in the warmth, leaving a thin red ring on the cloth beneath it. I thought about burning it, but the fire had gone out hours ago, and every time I tried to light a match, the air shifted. Damp, breathless, like the house itself was warning me not to. I wrapped the soap in the cloth again and shoved it into my pocket. My hands were shaking, but I knew what I had to do. There was no running from it. The river doesn't let you leave a debt unpaid. The fog met me halfway down the hill, thick and low, curling around my boots. The closer I got, the stronger the smell became, iron salt old soap. The trees leaned in, as though listening. When the river came into view, it wasn't calm. The surface rolled slow but constant, the mist bending, with its motion like lungs exhaling. I stood on the bank for a long time, staring at the black water. I brought it back, I said. My voice cracked, barely a whisper. You can take it. It's yours. The fog didn't move, the water didn't answer. Then the current shifted. A ripple widened from the center of the bend, smooth as breath. Something rose with it. At first, it looked like fabric, long strips, floating up through the water, pale as moonlight. Then the shapes took form. Shoulders, faces. 6 of them, maybe more their bodies, hidden below the surface. The Riverwives. Their scarves clung to their heads like second skins, their mouths slack, their eyes bright with something that wasn't life. You kept her one of them, said though her lips didn't move. The sound came from everywhere, the fog, the water, the air in my chest. I didn't, I said. I didn't mean to. You made her work, another whispered. You sold her name. I didn't want to forget her. Then don't. The first said, and they moved closer. The river hissed as they came each step, sending ripples toward the bank. Keep her if you love her so much. Something broke the surface behind them, hair dark and floating, glinting faintly under the moon. Mara. She rose slowly, water sliding from her face. Her eyes found mine, calm now, unblinking. The softness she'd carried in life was gone. She looked older, endless. You came back, she said. I had to. You shouldn't have. She moved closer the river, parting for her. The water didn't reach her mouth when she spoke. It moved around her like she belonged to it. Why are you doing this? I whispered. Her smile barely reached her eyes. Because I asked them to spare you. And they did. For a while. I shook my head. I didn't ask for any of this. She tilted her head. No, but you took it anyway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the soap. Take it back, please. She looked down at it, then at me. That's not mine anymore. It's you. I didn't understand at first. Then I saw the faint marks along my hands, thin white lines, like the start of pruning after a long bath. I rubbed at them hard, but they didn't fade. The air stank of the river. I'm sorry, I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine. I didn't know what you'd done. I did, she said softly, and I'd do it again. The water rose, not in waves, not like a flood, just higher, steady, pulling at the bank. The mud gave beneath my feet. Mara, please. She reached for me then. Her fingers touched my wrist, cold and soft, as silt. For a moment, it felt like forgiveness. Then she pulled. The current took me fast. The cold punched the air from my lungs, and the world became noise and weight. I opened my mouth to scream, but the river filled it, tasting of salt and metal and soap. Something brushed past my face hair, maybe hers, maybe mine. The hands that caught me were countless. They didn't drag, they guided. Down and down, until there was no sound at all. Then nothing. When I woke, the world was grey. I was lying on the riverbank, soaked, shivering the fog, so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. My hands were raw, my skin pale. The soap was gone. I stumbled back to the cottage. The door was open. The fire had been lit. The smell of lavender and yarrow hung in the air fresh warm. On the table sat a new batch of soap, still wet, wrapped neatly in linen. The labels were written in my handwriting. The river's gift. A faint humming came from the kitchen, the same low tune she used to sing when she worked. I followed it to the back door. It was wide open. The fog drifted in slow and thick, carrying the scent of water. And in that fog, I saw her silhouette, standing where the grass met the bank. She turned once, looking back toward me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she stepped forward and vanished into the mist. The humming stopped. The cottage fell silent. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in just right, and the air smells like rain and soap, I hear the sound of cloth twisting in water, slow and steady. And if I stand by the window long enough, I can almost see them through the glass. Women in the river, still washing, still waiting. They never found her. Not really. The police said the current was too strong, that the river carried her far downstream. But I know better, because some nights, when I wake to that faint humming from the kitchen, the air still smells like her lavender yarrow and something else. Something that doesn't belong to this world. The villagers don't ask questions anymore. They just nod when I pass, offer me tea, and lock their doors before dusk. And I keep the cottage clean, keep the water out, just like Hilda told me. But the fog still comes, and the river still sings. So if you ever move somewhere quiet somewhere, with old stories whispered through the floorboards, remember this: the river always keeps what it's given, and it never ever forgets your name.